Back in Houston, we inspect the airplane after an eventful landing in episode 3. We disable the hydraulics.
You see there's no way to put a safety wire or anything around the pin.
Lock out the landing gear.
And then go back around that cross tube there.
And prepare for a stiff-legged race against the sun to get the airplane home before dark.
I'm really hoping I don't regret this.
Many decisions were made on this ferry, some better than others. My name is Elliot Sigwin. Let's talk about what happened. Today's video is brought to you in part by Method 7. Method 7's custom line of aviation-inspired lenses are not only the best in the business, but they also provide an important cultural support that I value. Today's video is brought to you in part by Butler Parachutes. Butler's line of high-speed opening emergency parachutes gives me the confidence I need to do the work that needs doing. I appreciate them coming along. Welcome to episode 4 of the LongNoseThunder Re-Reflight. In this video, we go back to Houston to retrieve the LongNoseThunder after our incident on episode 3. The gear need to be secured, the hydraulic system disabled, and we'll walk through all that. Then we'll walk through the process of getting airborne and headed downrange to Bernie stage, and some interesting decision matrix that went into that. Beyond the technical, I hope to convey some of what I learned about leaving a customer's airplane off-site, and the way that our, or really my, internal pressure to perform for the customer exposed the airplane to more risk than maybe I would have liked. Let's talk about this program. Over the previous 3 episodes,
1, 2, 3.
we covered a lot of ground. In the first episode, we covered the inspection of the aircraft after the engine overhaul in DeLand, Florida. In the second episode, we did the functional check flight and got ready for the eventual ferry. And in the third episode, we covered the ferry up to the unplanned landing in Cleveland, Texas. In the time between dropping the aircraft off and returning to pick it up, I spent some time with Quentin Cook from Turbine Solutions talking about the events of the flight and making sure that we understood not only how they affected the hydraulic system, but also how they might have affected the engine. As previously discussed, Quentin is a wealth of knowledge on the 601 and was intensely valuable for this process. In particular, he's very knowledgeable about the fuel sump, which he designed and installed in the airplane. But more on that later. Seems like since the beginning of Wasabi, we've always done these mail outs, right? In the beginning, I would get postcards printed, say something on the back about how we were looking for sponsors, and mail them to the the Rolodex of the coolest people I could think of under the guise that I was looking for sponsorships. We continue this tradition today, but now I just ask that you send me your address, and we'll send you a combination of patches and stickers and buttons and whatever we have around. Turns out we've mailed like 1,000 of these so far this year, which my wife says is obnoxious.
It is obnoxious.
But from where I'm sitting, if people are interested in getting some Wasabi swag, I'm stoked to send it out. So thank you for your interest in Wasabi, and send me your mailing address to my email address, and I'll be happy to send you out a patch or sticker or something. Arriving at the Cleveland airport, I was shortly met by Chris Bahan, who had been the caretaker of the airplane while I was back in California. I arrived to find the airplane was well cared for and in the same spot we had left it. Chris had covered the airplane to protect it from incident, both with tarps and a plastic wrap I'd never seen before. It was a level of protection I didn't expect, and I was flattered that he had taken the effort. He'd also started to put the airplane on jacks, assuming we would be doing hydraulic diagnostics before we had settled out the plan that we were just going to lock the gear down, and that work was evident. As mentioned in episode 3, I had struggled with the right way to leave an airplane in this situation. At the end of the day, it's my responsibility to look after the airplane, and the owner expects me to look after it as though it were my own. One direct conflict on that topic is whether to leave the airplane on the ramp or seek out a hangar with all the associated risks. While on one hand, sitting on the ramp obviously exposes it to the elements, putting it in a hangar could mean that it's locked up by somebody, someone you don't know, with who knows what their motivations are. We had ended up renting a hangar from Chris Bahan. Here. Say hi, Chris.
Hello.
Which ended up being absolutely the right call. In the month it took for me to get back to Houston, there had been 10 days of heavy Texas rain, which would have been easily enough to overwhelm this little home built. Today's video is brought to you in part by our Patreon supporters. I'm constantly humbled by the individual efforts of an invested group of people that support what we do here. Thank you for being a part of it. Before committing to the plan, I wanted to make sure that the airplane was safe to fly. The three major symptoms coming out of that emergency: the fuel panel had failed, hydraulic pump needed to be inspected, confirmed that the fuel low level light had been damaged by over voltage. The fuel panel mysteriously worked after the incident, though it hadn't worked for the rest of that flight. Perhaps all it took was the power cycle, but we checked its functionality with the engine off. Without any other symptoms, there wasn't much else to do, so we moved on. The gauge was important because with the limitation of cruising at gear speed, we wouldn't know what to expect for fuel flow. So therefore, I'm relying on fuel level indicators. This was further compounded by the internal pressure to do the whole mission in a single day. We'll get to that. The hydraulic pump was surprisingly clean. When I had left, there was a dark powder, presumed to be soot, perhaps from the melting down of the brushes, on the fuselage and wing. Looking at the pump in the hangar, there was no soot visible, while a deeper look by pulling the bell housing would have been productive. It was determined it was not relative to the task of getting the airplane moved. So we just moved on to the next one. The low fuel light is part of the TST fuel sump system. The system is made up of a small fuel tank that is filled from the left or right tank as selected. The sump is small, sort of this sized, and carries just enough gas to run the engine for less than 60 seconds. That sump also includes a level sensor. So just as soon as that fuel comes down off the top of the fuel sump, a low level light in the cockpit gives the pilot that warning that there's only 60 seconds or so left to gas before the engine was going to quit. Since the light had indicated falsely twice during the incident, again presumed to be due to the overvoltage, I wanted to check its function. Okay, so we have level sensor in a bucket of Jet A. Chris, go ahead and pull it out so we see what we're doing. Removed the level sensor from the sump and I pulled some fuel out of the main tank. Chris dipped the sensor in the fuel while I watched the light in the cockpit. And then back out. And then back in, and then back out. When the lights seemed to be functioning as expected, we moved on. The plan was to disable the hydraulic system and fly the gear stiff-legged to Bernie stage. This would eliminate the short that was presumed to be the issue in the hydraulic pump. So we electrically disconnected the pump and the breaker was pulled. Without hydraulic pressure, there were two remaining concerns. First, and probably foremost, the inner gear doors. It's important to point out that the inner gear doors are a bit of a weak point on the Thunders. On top of that, the inner gear door locks don't function when the gear is selected down. There's a cable hooked to the gear selector in the cockpit. And therefore, because we knew they were a weak point and we were operating at gear speed, so I wanted to make sure they were secured in the up position. I disconnected the inner gear door sequencing such that the up locks would function. That is, the up locks on the inner gear doors. Then, once the gears were up, I safety wired them in place such that the locks would not let the doors go free. Next was the tail wheel down lock. As mentioned in previous episodes, the tail wheel made me nervous because it had collapsed on the owner before. That collapse was directly related to landing the airplane without hydraulic pressure. Tail wheel retraction mechanism, that's the hydraulic actuator. So since we knew we weren't going to be flying with hydraulic pressure, I wanted to lock them down. You can see the safety wire, wrap that around there, and then it'll go back around that cross tube there to hold the tail wheel in the locked position. Okay, so now it's installed. You can see the tension on it. So it goes back around the cross tube there for the tail wheel door assembly. It goes around the plane. Just one more thing, keeping the tail wheel locked. For due diligence, since we were locking down the tail wheel, I decided to lock down the main wheels as well. This is the hydraulic actuator. This is the lock assembly and the hydraulics that run the locks. The other side there. So with the pin engaged, the gear should be down and locked. Couldn't come up with a clean way to hold the pin in. And you see there's no way to put a safety wire or anything around the pin. So we just added this little bit of safety wire just going around the rod end here. Hopefully it holds the knuckle down, but again, the bulk of the work's being done by the lock. Finished pinning the inners. Locking down the mains, check the fuel sensor, leak check the fuel sensor after we did that, and we're getting ready to pull it outside and do a ground run. After the inspection, I ran the engine. The engine run included a normal start, propeller defeather, electrical systems check, feather check, brake check, and then a normal shutdown. Fuel pump. systems appeared to be normal, we prepared for flight. As mentioned in the previous episodes, the tailwheel door on the long nose is a bit of an issue. The combination of the bracket not having hard stops, so the tailwheel doors not having a good hard stop, and the rod end that fires it being loaded asymmetrically makes it a weak point on the airplane. An interesting moment here where we're doing the engine run after the inspection, getting ready for the functional check flight at Cleveland, and Chris pointed out that left-hand gear door was wiggling all around. We had inspected the gear door as a part of the normal inspection before the flight. So here you can see the footage that Chris shot of the gear door wiggling on the ground with the engine at idle. Just some more interesting data about how that left tailwheel door just gets hammered for whatever reason due to local airflow. If you remember from episode 3, when we quit, I was roughly halfway through that first tank of gas, or roughly a quarter of the way through the flight. When the problem happened, I believed I could make it to Bernie nonstop, some 200 nautical miles at 250 miles per hour. The issue was now that the gear was out and I was going to be limited to gear speed, 125 nautical miles per hour, which wouldn't be an issue if the fuel flow scaled directly with speed, but of course it doesn't. So this related to the next problem. I didn't know what the fuel flow would be during this cruise at this low speed and partial power setting. So based on what I had read in the manual, the fuel flow at a given power output of the 601 was particularly bad at low to mid power setting. Based on these assumptions, the fuel flow wouldn't have to get very high before I would have trouble making the 200-mile trip from Cleveland to Bernie Stage nonstop, especially since the tanks weren't full and there wasn't any gas at the Cleveland airport. This also put added pressure on the functional check flight to keep it short, and therefore saving gas for the eventual ferry. So we need to keep the functional check flight quick. Most of the goals focused on this being my first time flying the airplane stiff-legged. I wanted to check the feasibility of flying in this configuration, specifically oil temp. We know oil temp was an issue in Florida, and that the inner gear doors in this new configuration were secure and could be counted on for the, roughly 2 hours of flying to Bernie Stage. Chris wanted to come along on the functional check flight, but I was too nervous that there would be some sort of an unforeseen issue. So despite all of that hard work from Chris, I left him on the ground, and to this day, I owe him a ride in something. As mentioned in episode 2, the previous engine failure had likely been caused by runaway oil temperature. This is the engine failure that resulted in the engine overhaul by Quentin in DeLand. And therefore, those first flights over DeLand had required some tweaking to the oil cooling system to keep the temperatures under control. The concern was that with these slow speeds required by the gear down configuration and the added drag due to the gear being down, I'd have to run more power, so there'd be more load on the oil cooling system, and would perhaps be enough to overwhelm the system, with runaway oil temperatures that resulted in an engine failure. So the goal for this FCF was to simulate that scenario as much as possible, again trying to save gas, while over that familiar airport of Cleveland where we had services, etc., before committing to go downrange. So the functional check flight was a normal takeoff, climbed to just above pattern altitude, and then adjusted power until I could hold gear speed with the gear down, and then waited for the oil temperature to stabilize. Then it was a normal return to base and landing. Before I landed, I had Chris observe from the ground to see that the gear looked secure. He confirmed that it did via radio, and we proceeded with the landing. When I landed, I had to come to grips with the fact that there was enough time in the day to get the airplane back to Bernie. At least roughly enough time.
I got video of the gear door so you can see what it looks like. That left one.
Is it still attached?
Yeah, it's still attached. That left one's chased up there's no tomorrow, right? Just check that out.
At this moment, I needed to make a choice based on where I was most likely to end up at sunset. And the problem was the rental car. In most cases, an Uber will run you about $1 a mile, and a rental car will run you about $30 a day. Most of my trips put me on site for 2 to 3 days and require a drive about 30 to 60 minutes from a major hub airport to the airplane. In most cases, the Uber is the cheaper way to make that trek, but as the uncertainty of the trip goes up, possibility of a need to make sub-trips for specialty tools, jet fuel, perhaps a meal. In this case, I knew I needed to do some work on the airplane. I had the gas issue of not having gas at Cleveland, so the uncertainty was high enough that I had gone with the rental car. which is a problem in this case when everything is going super smooth and a 2-day project is turning into a 1-day project, and now you just have the burden of trying to get that rental car back to the Houston International Airport. What made it worse is that if you ran out of sun and aborted, say, 50 miles out, the alternates that were available, something like San Marcos or Lockhart or maybe Austin, are all well outside of walking distance from the local hotels. You'd be coming in late and without a lot of pre-planning. The likelihood that you'd end up sleeping in an FBO wasn't low, but we've all done that before. The bigger issue was that we'd set a precedent on the program, and I like to set a precedent maybe in general, that we don't leave the customer's airplane outside overnight. Long story short, I needed to make a bet. Based on this long list of unknowns, I chose to be aggressive and go for it.
What a move. I fell in love right there.
It's also worth noting that in my haste to get down to the international airport in time, get the rental car down, get the Uber back up, I may have been a little aggressive, a little heavy-footed on those Texas highways. And I was met by a very friendly Texas police officer who let me know I was going beyond the posted speed limit. Perhaps he liked my orange flight suit. He let me go with a warning. Only had to deal with my own ego for the rest of the drive down to Houston International Airport, catch that Uber back up to Cleveland. The first leg from Cleveland to Fayetteville is 100 miles, and it took about 60 minutes. I'm sorry?
What is that, your copyright saying airplanes are cool?
Airplanes are cool. For a while we were saying it's just an airplane. My wife cut me off on that. I'm not allowed to say that anymore. It implies that we're not afraid of it. You need to be afraid of it.
I'll shut up. You need to get out of here.
All right, I'll see you later.
Hopefully not. Hopefully never.
Cleveland traffic Skyway 944 on left base runway 16 Cleveland. Cleveland traffic Skyway 944 left base to final runway 34 Cleveland. Runway 16 Cleveland.
The early portion of this leg was dominated by some low clouds, which I had to divert around and added a little bit of time, but no big deal.
Cleveland traffic, Superman 151 Papa Kilos, taking runway 16, and we'll be westbound. Cleveland traffic, check 805 to November clear 16, taxi to T hangars, Cleveland. Cleveland traffic, factory 10 Delta, turning crosswind for left.
Oil temp did worse on that leg than it had done during my little simulated leg over Cleveland, especially once I was able to climb up to the cooler altitudes. I was able to keep it under control and proceed with the flight at gear speed. I didn't have to slow down and run less power, which worked out nice. Without fuel flow indication, this first leg included the first real data about the fuel economy in this configuration. While I didn't know exactly what the fuel flow would be, I had high confidence of fuel probes because of all the testing we had done in DeLand. Luckily, we had done that work in DeLand because I was able to be comfortable down at low indicated fuel values, be confident there was still gas in the tank, and proceed deeper into the tank and further downrange. It's roughly 30 minutes on the clock. I got to the point that I could confirm my assumption that fuel economy would not be good enough to make it all the way to Bernie stage, and I had to prepare myself for a fuel stop. Of course, the trick would be finding the airport where the fuel pumps were close to the runway, where maybe there was a credit card machine rather than an attendant, and I could quickly get through that phase, get the airplane gassed up, and get further down the road.
Try it on. It's yours.
And Fayetteville traffic, Experimental 151 Papa Kilo, left base 16. And Fayetteville traffic, Experimental 151 Papa Kilo's final, 1516. Idle stop. Beta locks up. Flaps coming up.
I was very fortunate to come across the airport manager at the Fayetteville airport. I have forgotten his name, but he was fantastic, and for the most part I swiped my card, did a walk around the airplane, and got back in the airplane while he finished fueling the airplane. You don't get much better service than that, only in Texas. The second leg, Flight 3, was from Fayetteville to the Boerne Stage Airport. The distance was 92 miles. The flight took 53 minutes at an altitude of 8,500 feet. Watching the sun set over the nose, I checked and rechecked my watch, recognizing that it was going to be darker than I hoped when I landed.
Okay, visor up. There's a thing, if you wait to take your sunglasses off or your visor off, and when you finally do, it's like you got another 15 minutes of daylight. You're like, well, shit, it's not that bad.
I prepared myself for what would be the lowest light landing I had done in the airplane.
Don't worry, it's coming fast enough.
Not ideal, and definitely a result of my decision to take risk earlier in the day.
There goes the last bit of light. No big deal.
And as I think all pilots will recognize, it's sort of one of those things where you make the logical decision and that still, as you watch the sun go down, you're second guessing yourself the whole way, because it turns out the sun goes down kind of slow and you have plenty of time to think about all the mistakes you might have made today and where it may all end up.
I'm really hoping I don't regret this.
No one's ever been so nice to me.
It's important to say that the airplane is legal for night flight.
8 minutes to the target.
Since I wasn't carrying a passenger, it didn't matter that I wasn't night current in the airplane.
5 minutes. 5 minutes to the target.
That being said, of course, flying at night carries more risk than flying during the day.
Boerne Stage traffic. Experimental 151 Papa Kilo showing 7 miles east of the field inbound landing.
I mentioned in previous episodes that the Boerne Stage Airport was known to be a bit tricky. Being on an incline with houses and trees around it, not particularly long. Landing at night was not planned, but unfortunately I committed to that decision much earlier in the day. All that being said, I was happy with the landing. Interesting side note, in situations like this, planning is key. I think that goes without saying.
Boerne Stage 5863, we are 5 miles.
But when the owner gave me the destination airport...
The Cirrus at Boerne Stage. You know anything about the labeling on these two hangars?
And he gave me the hangar I was going to. I didn't ask for that last step.
You have to look right on the end of the hangar, you'll see the word hotel.
Maybe a Google Earth drawing with a dot over the hangar or a picture of the outside of the hangar.
So is the hotel the name of the alleyway or the hangar?
Things that are available with modern technology.
It's the name of the hangar.
And you'd be surprised how lost you can get.
What kind of airplane is that?
On a little Texas airport with a big scary jet motor running on the front, burning way too much gas.
It's a Thunder Mustang. Welcome.
While you look for the little tiny numbers that they put on hangars, it's my fault. I should ask for more clear directions. You and I both will do better next time. Hey Gid, I'm here in San Antonio, still sitting in the airplane. You can see it was a heck of a day, man. It was a lot of work, but airplane's delivered, so the mission's complete. So the next step is just come home to you. I'll catch a flight in the morning, and I'll see you very soon. I love you too, buddy. With the airplane delivered, the mission is technically complete. Though with the hydraulic system broken and the gear disabled, it felt more like I was delivering a mess than delivering an airplane. But more on that later. I think there are a couple of lessons learned from this program. In the case of putting the airplane inside versus outside when I abandoned it in Cleveland, whatever it was, a month before, I think it's important to say that we made the right call by putting it inside. It's really scary to leave somebody else's airplane with people that you don't know at an airport you don't know. But I think we made the right decision. Number one, Chris did a great job, took good care of the airplane. There's no damage, nothing like that. The airplane came back exactly as I expected it to. I think the decision to do extensive flying over DeLand before we left proved valuable in multiple ways. The biggest of which being testing the fuel system so that I had the confidence to burn deep into the tank, eliminating a source of anxiety during those last few minutes of that last leg with the sun setting and Boerne Stage still on the horizon. Well, thanks for coming along on another adventure. I can't say how much I appreciate the ability to share this stuff with you. So thank you to Lance for being open about your program, and thank you to all you for sticking around all the way here to the end of the video. It wasn't a short one. I appreciate the support, and we'll catch you on the next one. Airplanes are cool.
It ought to be fast. It does all right. Always want more. Oh. At least I do. I don't know. Oh yeah, maybe well. You figured a way around. Me, I'm the other way around. I like slow and get in and out of pastures. There you go. What are you flying? I've got a Cessna 180 and one of a kind.